appreciate everyone, joining us this afternoon for our PM session. My name is Lucy Hernandez. I am with I'm a strategies technical assistant consultant, and I'm here to support our two presenters. Our two presenters are from Implematix consulting firm. We have our presenters are Kevin Morgan and Khush Cooper, and they are dynamic. If you have been working on our CPP in the last 18 months or year or so, you have seen Khush Cooper and Kevin in our sessions. They work very closely, obviously, with the state, and they're a great resource. So we feel very honored to have them today and presenting this important topic, because many of us are done with our CPP, but now what? So this is an excellent topic to discuss today. So with that, Kevin and Khush, it's all yours. Thank you again. I will be here if you have any questions. I will be monitoring the chat box as well. All right. Thank you for our speakers. All right. I'll pass it on to you.
Great. Thank you, Lucy, very much. Hi, everyone. See lots of familiar names and faces in the windows. Really great to be with you and to talk about, as our name says, our favorite topic, implementation. And my name is Dr. Khush Cooper. I am the CEO of Implematix. And I'm also an adjunct professor of social work at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. Been consulting in the California space for the last, human services space, mostly child welfare, for the last 25 years. Kevin will introduce himself in a moment, and what our firm does is in your list of resources. So we won't take up time with all that, and we'll get right into our topic. Before we do that, I want to acknowledge living and working on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Chumash, Gabrielino Tongva, and Fernandeño Tatavian peoples, who are the rightful owners of the land we now call the San Fernando Valley. I also want to acknowledge and pay my respect to the many ancestors of many races and ethnicities whose enslaved forced labor was endured for this country's development and economic progress, from which I draw privilege. We encourage everyone to do their own research on these aspects, as recommended by our really wonderful plenary presentation earlier this morning. And I am going to put those resources in the chat. Right. So before we get into the technical aspects of what we recommend you do now that your CPP is approved, we want to just get us all present to why we do this work. It's complicated. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of jargon. There are a lot of delays. And we've probably all wanted to pull our hair out at one point or another over the last 18 to 24 months when it comes to some aspect of this implementation. But we're doing this work. We're willing to put up with all of that because for the first time in my career, there is a kind of focus on family wellness, which is really what one wants to prevent child maltreatment. I haven't seen a focus like this yet. And so when you find yourself stressed out, when you find yourself like, wow, like nobody seems to know what they're doing, or why can't we get this going faster? Or why does it have to be EBPs? Just remind yourselves that we are doing something kind of transformational and revolutionary for reorienting ourselves to keeping families together and keeping families well. So just all of this, Implematix was created so we could support implementations of innovations that support families. So just want us to ground us in like, it is ultimately worth it. All right, Kevin, I'm
All
gonna bring
right.
you into the conversation and let you
Good
introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you very much, Khush. I appreciate it. I'm Kevin Morgan. I've been working with Khush for about 8 years in human services and child welfare implementation. Prior to that, I have a background in large scale organizational transformation, program project, and process improvement in the private sector. I am not co-located with Khush. I am in the city of San Francisco, city and county of San Francisco. I am on Ramaytush tribal territory of the Ohlone peoples. And I also, as Khush had said, acknowledge that much of the privilege and the life that I enjoy is because of the gift of the land that was not ceded by these peoples. We are going to, so this is a little bit of an apology and what you're going to get. We're going to give you a lot of information really fast. The deck is designed to be a resource for you as we wind up today's session so that you can use it and reference it. I wanted to also, because of the work that Khush and I have done, it's very easy to get overwhelmed in this world of planning and thinking about the amount of work that has to happen. And, it's easy to say, yes, we're talking about, system paradigm change and the prevention, the major changes with prevention. And it is easy to get overwhelmed. So I really liked this quote from Dr. King. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And with the idea that as you take one step and the next step, that more and more becomes available to you and more is going to, you'll be able to see the whole staircase and so forth. The two of us will take turns doing presentations. Khush has agreed to sort of represent the point of view of the of social worker and social work writ large. I will represent the world of project management and structure and organization. And part of hopefully what you will see is to see us go back and forth and ask questions of each other. And those should be a microcosm of the kinds of questions and conversations that you may be having in your agencies and organizations. I want to say that we will mostly be focusing on implementation of the CPP. I realize that every county has a different CPP, that they have a different set of circumstances that they're working with, that they have different strategies, that they have different populations they're wanting to work with, they have different challenges that they're trying to resolve. What we're going to present to you is kind of the big picture, the big, most generous, as it were, approach to it. Always take that with a grain of salt and know that you have to modify this in any way that makes sense to you so that it will operate there. So for some of you, some of the things we say might not go far enough. For some of others of you, it will seem like it's way too much. Just know that it's all there and that you can modify it as you know. We'll mostly be talking, as I said, about CPP implementation. We'll touch a little bit here and there on community engagement, but we're not going to have a deep discussion about community pathways. That's a separate kind of conversation. I highly recommend the PEI community pathways recommendations. If you don't have a copy of them, there are many places to get them, and they can be very helpful in understanding the community pathways part. And that being said, this should fit inside this conversation today, should fit, be able to accommodate and integrate community pathways. Thanks, Khush. Next slide, if you would. All right. So what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about, or Khush, do you want to take this? Do you want to
Sure.
take this one? All right.
Sure. So we're going to talk about implementation, and we're going to kind of move. We want to leave you with some tactical guidance, all right, on the ground. I mean, those are the CPPs are a plan. They're a theory, essentially, on how and on strategies you're going to use. But now the strategies have to turn into tactics on the ground to be able to create organization that will serve people. Okay? Some sort of organization. Doesn't have to be a formal organization, but you have to have some sort of way to organize yourselves to get these services to families. We're going to do that by connecting sort of a big picture. We'll show you sort of keep the big picture in mind all the time as you go down implementation rabbit holes. And so we'll connect the big picture or show you how to connect it to your local implementation. We'll make sure that we define terminology that we use along the way. And then we're going to leave you with some questions that actually are from a matrix. And we'll show you how to use those questions to plan and organize your implementation. And then we'll go through some of the questions in each of the domains. All right, but they'll be there, like Kevin said, for your reference.
Put that stuff with it.
All right, so what's the big picture? All right. And before I show you the next slide, I want to just talk about the big picture a bit.
State stuff.
When someone asks us at Implematix to support them to implement something, right? The first question we will ask is, okay, can you say a little bit about what it is, right? Do you have a blueprint for it that we might use to be able to support you to organize your implementation, right? And so the big picture that I'm about to show you in the next slide is the it that Kevin and I keep in mind, right? It's a synthesis of many of the vision statements that you may have heard in your planning, but that's the it overall that needs to get implemented. All right. So what is it? What are we doing here together? Right. We want to build a statewide integrated primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention system that will engage quickly with all families at risk and address their needs by building connections and enhancing access to safety nets to prevent child welfare involvement, entry and re-entry into foster care, as well as adoption disruption, while continuously reducing disproportionality and disparity throughout the system in order to enhance child, family, and community well-being. It's a mouthful, but essentially, when all of our CPPs are trying to do this, we have different pathways to get here, but this is what we're building. A integrated prevention continuum, right? A system that's an integrated continuum, a system that supports families so they don't come to the door of the child welfare system, and a system that is equitable and is at the base of it founded on child, family, and community wellness, which we know every system that's engaged in some sort of prevention, either the child welfare system or the probation system or the public health system, it all roads ultimately lead back to well families. Right? If families are well, you're able to prevent some of the issues that then have them be at the brink of system involvement. All right, so this is the it. So now let's connect it generically to, all right, so Kevin, what would we do? All right, so this is often a conversation that I'll have with Kevin. Is okay, somebody just called us and they want us to they want us to do this. Okay, and then Kevin will start to ask me some questions.
And I'll
And-
say, well, let's define our terminology. All right, so here I am with scary slide number 1. And the reason we're going to spend a little time, this will help you in understanding the rest of the presentation and how we're using words and terminology. Again, you don't have to use these words and terminology. This just helps you decode what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So one of the first questions I'd ask, well, is how are we defining the work we're going to do? And I'm going to start at the top. And when we use the phrase prevention program, and again, some of you are probably looking at this going, well, my county's not that big. And some of you are looking like, oh yeah, that's just the beginning. That's such a simple slide compared to what I've got. But this is just about terminology, so bear with me. So when we use the term prevention program, we're talking about the prevention program at the county or tribal, Title 4E tribal level. So we're talking about how the whole thing hangs together. If we use the phrase local prevention program, we're often talking, because we're in the county system, we're talking about agencies, right? So there may be probation may have a local prevention program. Child welfare might have a local prevention program, and or behavioral health may have their own. We use the term local just to define that belongs to the agency, and that's under the jurisdiction of the agency. Each one of those prevention programs will look at child welfare, may have multiple strategies that constitute that program. So for instance, we might have a program in a child welfare department that says we're going to focus on 3 things. We're going to focus on parental education. We're going to focus on kids 0 to 5. And we're going to focus on direct family needs and seeing what we can do in the community to support those. So those might be strategies that make up the child welfare program. Each of those strategies could have multiple kinds of services. So just using the example of children ages 0 to 5, there may be 3 different services that constitute that strategy. In this example, we're going to have an improved positive toxicity program. We're going to do that in conjunction with the existing public health agency. We are going to do some improvement with childcare. We're going to maybe do direct grants for some period of time with existing childcare agencies, or we're going to support somebody in putting together a childcare program. And we might have a service around preschool and early education that we either do in conjunction with existing programs, or we're going to be adjunct and be part of that in terms of both funding and how we do that. So that's what we mean by services under strategies, and those roll up into a prevention program. And the final row, the domains, is going to be what we spend the rest of the conversation about, and I'll go into those in general. So these are, no matter what service you're going to put together, you want to think about all these things about each of those services. You want to think about all 10, there's actually 10 of these that go into each of these services. Now, will each service require that you do a whole lot for each of those, for all 10? No. Think of those domains as these are the kinds of things that are likely to be important to think about, but they will vary dramatically depending on the circumstances and what you're doing. Khush, I think I'm ready for the next one. This slide and the next one, Khush, if you would, are really
these are reference slides.
Reference, right, for what I was talking about. So we can go to the next one. We can go to that domain matrix. All right. So you'll see here, there's 10 squares in case some of you are doing the counting already. The inside is about, and this is a way of thinking about any implementation, any significant large implementation that you're going to take on. will have these 10 components in terms of what we're trying to do. Governance, stakeholders, program design, the policy, workforce, measurements, fiscal automation, reporting, and DEI. So those are the 9 domains that are in the squares are what we're going to be going through each one of those and thinking about each one of those. We're going to present them in a roughly chronological order. Now, one of the things that is tough about this work is it seems like, well, gee, I'm just getting started. You know, do I really need to be concerned about reporting? Well, if you're going to be in the process of looking at providers, you're going to want to specify how you want reporting done. So in some ways, you kind of have to have a high level idea of all of these as you get started. And we call that kind of the 360-degree view. You kind of want to look at what we're presenting together and all the questions and have some idea of what they are, because what you'll find is these things are very interrelated. So you need to think about all of it as you plan. You need to think about all 360 degrees. And this is especially important in terms of the significance of doing a major systems change. Khush, I'm ready for the next slide. All right, I want to start with, well, I'm not going to start with, but yeah, I'm going to start with. So the frame of our picture is equity and inclusion. And the way that it's depicted here graphically and as a model is that equity inclusion is not a separate thing that is over here and that is addressed over here like fiscal. The reason for that is that equity inclusion needs to be part of every single one of these conversations. You could say it is the context in which we need to hold all of these conversations, whether you're talking about workforce, governance, reporting, or automation. Equity inclusion has to be integrated and has to be part of all of those pieces. Next slide, Khush. And here's just some ways to, to think about that. And I wanted to use some examples of the domain. I'm looking at the third bullet. So how does a context play out? It's going to be very different depending on the domain we're talking about. Here's just some examples to get you to start to think about this. So how do you ensure inclusion in the governance box, right? When you're talking about governance and how the project's going to be overseen and how that's all going to work. Well, it may include how you're going to ask your community to be involved with it. Now, many of you got involved, or you're a governance community or governance committee, an AB 2083 ITL or PEI cabinet may have already been involved, and they may be involved. But did they have an advisory committee? And if so, who were those people? Well, you may want to think about how you're going to tap into that and how it makes sense and who to include based on the nature of the project and the work you're going to do. So how would reporting be? How would the context of equity inclusion be part of reporting? Well, how are you going to report the numbers? Do you need to disaggregate your demographic data for particular reasons? How would you do that? Would you be looking at things geographically, like by zip code? Would you be looking at things along racial or ethnic lines, communities of affiliation, communities of geography? How are you going to do that? So equity inclusion is part of your reporting construct. How might you think about including LGBTQ plus youth who, where you're going to offer a particular service for them, and the provider that you're talking to has a really nice office over here near the freeway, partially out of town, and yet the center, the LGBTQ center that does a lot of work with these youth might be downtown and located somewhere else. So it might be that you say, well, provider, we actually want you to be closer to this downtown location because we know a lot of the youth are there already and we could have access. That's just one example of how you might want to think about your equity and inclusion in terms of organizing and even selecting providers. Thanks, Khush. Any comments on that, Khush, around
Well,
equity and inclusion and the importance of it? Okay.
no, just that it should be the first question, the primary context inside which all the domain conversations
Yep.
happen. So, so moving along in our social worker and project manager interaction here. Okay, so there's a big picture. Kevin, talk to us about, okay, dividing it, like talk about the overall program, how they are then how the program's organized by agency, what are the strategies, what are the services inside those strategies, and then there's the domains, which I have proceeded to memorize. And the next question then becomes, okay, Kevin, so we've got a map of the thing, we've got our definitions. Now what? Right? Like now, that's a lot of domains.
Yes.
Right? How to go about starting without being overwhelmed. Right? How do you actually build a roadmap for your implementation?
Well, Khush,
That really simple one.
well, you know me well enough to know my answer is always going to be, well, you get out a spreadsheet and you make a matrix, right? So here it is. If you go to the next slide, actually, why don't you show me that? We'll come back to this.
Okay.
So this is just graphically a way to do it, and as you are thinking about your plan and planning your project, whether that's implementation of the whole strategy or just a particular service, you see on going across, as it were, the x-axis, I guess, you see the time. You see March, April, May, June, July, August, September. You could have quarters, you could have years, you could have weeks. It doesn't matter. You have to change it so it works for you. What I will recommend is that you have a big red implementation line that sort of shows this is what we're trying to do. I'm going to suggest that along the rows that you put the y-axis, that you use the domains. And you think about them one at a time as you start to go through the work. I'm going to suggest that you use the idea of deliverables. And Khush has a great definition for deliverable. And that is, if you can't hold it up on a Zoom call, then it's not a deliverable. Or you can't bring somebody in and point to them and say, that's my deliverable right there. So a deliverable is a noun. It is not, and it's important when you're putting these together that you don't use terms like work on this project, talk to providers. It's like, you want to use conclusions. So you say something like first provider forum complete, for instance, right? Boom, done. And you want to put these nouns, you want to put these things, these deliverables, and you want to start sequencing them in time. And you want to start at the end and work backwards. So if you know by September, you need to have a particular thing done, let's say, well, let's use program design as an example. If you want to implement a new service by September, it usually takes about 6 months to get a new contract with the county, then you need to have your program design pretty well done by the end of March. Right? It's like if I want to be implementing my program design in September, then that means I need to do it in March. Does that make sense? You want to start with the end and work backwards. Oh, if I need it implemented in September, then I need it approved by the board by this time, and I need my management to approve it by that time. And I need to have it designed by this time. So what you're doing is you're thinking about those deliverables for each of those domains, and you're putting them in time. You start at the end and you work backwards. So that's a lot right there. We'll move on to we should go to the second page. Yeah, that's fine. Let's do that. So these are just some notes about roadmaps. It's a high-level graphic timeline. Deliverables are defined there. A thing, a product, a document, a decision, a contract. It's a thing. And you can use those phrases when you're filling in the roadmap. Now, the roadmap is not a big formal thing that you're required to have that you show to everybody, but it's a very, very useful conversation for you to have with your key implementation team. Like the team can sit down and start saying, okay, what do we need to do here? And what do we need to do here? So there is a lot of thought to doing these. It will make your head hurt. I've done a million of them in my career. They still make my head hurt. But the most important thing is to spend some time thinking about it. That way you have a picture of the entire project. You will see how the deliverables interact with each other across a row, across a domain, and you'll see how they interrelate across domains. So for instance, you obviously need a contract before you can start, working closely with the provider. You obviously need to have an RFI or an RFP put together before you're signing contracts. You obviously need to have thought through some of your fiscal considerations well before you're talking to the accounts receivable and accounts payable people, or you're talking to particular agencies. All right, Khush, I think we can, yep, there's the rest of them. All right, let's go on to the next slide, Khush. Unless you wanted to say anything?
Well, so, I'll just say that how it looks to go through this, right? If we were to, it looks like folks getting together, right, with this up on the screen, right, and us starting to have conversations about, well, what is implementation? Like, how will we know we're implemented? And then working backwards from there, and someone actually typing into these. Like Kevin said, this is a checklist. Not all of this will apply to you, right? And for some of the larger jurisdictions that have many layers, just these rows may not be enough. Right? You may want to have 4 fiscal rows, depending on how complex your system is. You may want to have a fiscal funding, because there's deliverables around there. You might have one or a row for contracts. Mm-hmm. You might want to have a separate row for claims and payments, right? Or you can talk about all these things in one cell, right? So there's start with the backbone of the domains, but then you can customize as you go. Mm-hmm.
And Khush, thank you for that. And there's absolutely there's nothing to be ashamed of if you end up with 10 pages and you only have 1 row per page. This is in PowerPoint. You could actually just simply, it's very easy to replicate, to do it in PowerPoint. It tends to work pretty well. I mean, you can certainly do it in an Excel spreadsheet. You can certainly do it in Word. But it's tended to work pretty well for people to have this, because everybody's got PowerPoint, and it's a good way to present things and to organize things. So as Khush said, bring the people together who are going to be your core planning team and start to have these conversations. The idea is that we're organizing the work, and we're organizing the people who are going to do the work, and we're sequencing that work in time.
The other thing that I found really helpful when doing something like this is having someone who has sort of mindset of a project manager, not necessarily the mindset of a social worker, actually facilitating through the exercise, because there's a way in which someone like Kevin can ask questions. We can go into the weeds, we can get lost in jargon, we can go down rabbit holes based on our our years of technical expertise or clinical expertise, and having to explain it, having to explain sort of our trajectory to get to a goal to a project manager it keeps the implementation team really honest. So that's the other thing I'll kind of say about it.
No, Khush, that's a great point, because it has to be a conversation. And one of the things that's really important is making sure that these deliverables, and when you're mapping it out, are at a fairly equivalent level of conversation, right? Sometimes we get way in the weeds and we want to put like every deliverable, like, I don't know, get my pen out from the desk drawer and do this and type up the, like, you can't go too far. Then that's a whole other project. That's a lot of work. You also don't want to be so high level that nobody knows what it is. Spending time figuring out just about where that is going to be actually a very important part of the conversation, and making sure everybody understands the major deliverables and when they have to happen is critical to this. So I would suggest you might want to take this template, make your own, use any colors you want, doesn't matter, use any time frame that makes sense to you, and start to organize the work based on the questions you'll see as we go through each domain. Each domain that we're going to talk about today has a set of questions behind it. As you start to think about those questions, that would help to lead you to place those deliverables in a particular place.
And Kevin, how often should they update this? And how should they do that?
That's a great question, Khush. And one of the things that's great about having this is if you, for instance, you have a team of people, let's say, as you organize all this work, you might then call all those people together. You might have your team leads get together or your team get together. And generally what you'll find is that most of these will break out along logical kinds of functions inside your organization. So reporting and service quality might belong to some of your CQI folks. And, you invite the IT person for automation. Maybe you have somebody from your child welfare hiring area to help you with workforce, or somebody from training to help you with workforce. But what you want to do is organize by the work, not by the specialty, even though it lines up. In other words, you want to make sure that your training person is in the conversation with your fiscal person, with your CQI person, so that as you're working out what has to be done, that everyone understands the work, understands the common goals, understands their time frame, and understands how their work is interdependent. And I would bring those people together at least once every couple weeks, and I would go through this and update it once every couple weeks. If you have a very important deliverable that you're trying to get done and you need input from fiscal, or you need input from the policy people, you want to know as soon as possible. Policy says, yeah, we were going to try and get that out last week, but it got delayed because of these things happened and we won't be able to get to it till next month. Well, you need to know that sooner rather than a month from now. And so regular cadence of meetings with your project team every 2 weeks, at least, sometimes every week if you've got a lot of complexity, and then updating this document as you go.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Khush. Great question. All right, ready to go.
Right. So we showed you the way to organize the conversations and we showed you the domain. So now we're going to take a deep dive, but it's a very quick deep dive. We're going to climb out. We're going to jump deep and climb out quickly into each of the domains. We're not going to go through every question inside of every domain. Those are for your reference to start to ask yourselves on the ground as you have your planning conversations. And you know, the types of questions just start to hint at who, like Kevin was pointing to, might you want to involve, in addition to your original look, to make sure that the context of equity and inclusion, right, is brought to each domain area.
Well, I'm going to
Right.
start with diving into governance and stakeholders. We put them together because they are so closely related. So you'll see as you go through the slides, you'll see this sort of "you are here" colored coding, so you know what happens next. Next slide, Khush. So why are we starting with stakeholders and governance? Why is that the most important thing? Because everything is going to either come from here. What's the vision? What is the agency's prevention vision? Understanding how that's going to be governed, we're going to be getting into that. Especially if you do have a situation where you've got child welfare, probation, maybe education, maybe behavioral health are all sitting at the table having conversations. Perhaps they all signed off on the plan. How does that work? Very quickly, and this may be something that's new. I know a lot of you were able to use your existing ITL 2083 committee. Some of you use PEI. A lot of these committees have been in a lot of counties have been primarily focused on very conceptual kinds of things. They're looking at the CPP. It's like, oh, what would we like to do? What might that look like, etc. It's going to be different when you start saying who's signing this contract, right? Like the county does not have a way to have the ITIL committee approve a contract. It's going to have to be somebody with the signing authority. Who is that person? So understanding who has jurisdiction, how people want to do that, how decisions want to be, how we want to make decisions, how we want to do everything is going to come from and go back to your governance community and so forth. Next slide, Khush, if you would, please. All right, so here's another, no, wait. We're going to start small and build up. All right, so first place. So some of you, that's good, that's fine. Is it? Why is it doing?
Sorry, Kevin, I'm trying to answer something in the chat and it is not letting me, so I'm not going to do that.
All right, okay, thanks. All right, okay. But because you stole all my exciting thunder. All right, this is another slightly scary diagram. I promise there's not too many. This one will build on. All right, so there's a local prevention program. And there's remember we talked about having a series of strategies. So somebody owns the implementation of that strategy, let's say, and they report
like
to
childcare, right, Kevin? Like
childcare would be an example of that.
Yep.
So childcare has a prevention program. Let's say they've got 3 strategies, maybe they've got 5 strategies. Somebody owns that strategy for the organization. They're inside child welfare and the report up. All right, now click over if you would for me. One more. All right, so there's the example, right? There might be 3 strategies in child welfare, and child welfare has jurisdiction over those strategies. The director of child welfare is going to be signing the contracts. There's a standard way that we work with whoever in fiscal to help us with this. We have somebody in contracts to help us with that, etc. So that's the basic, that's a very basic approach. Now, Khush, next one. You could also have the same things going on, say, in juvenile probation and behavioral health. Next one. And that might roll up into a multi-agency prevention program governance structure. So who is that? How is that done? Does You're going to need to think about how, does behavioral health own this contract? And is that signed by behavioral health? Does child welfare own that contract? If you're doing something jointly between child welfare and juvenile probation, do you need signatories of both of them, or do you need perhaps a very large contract? Do you need somebody with even higher authority, maybe somebody who has in the county? So you want to build this map for yourself and understand how it works. Khush, then the next one, right? And then there may be a senior committee. So some counties that Khush and I have worked with have a committee that is kind of overseeing the child welfare juvenile probation area, and they're a subcommittee of a much larger 2083 committee, or however you decide to be that, because you probably don't want everybody in the committee at all the meetings, but you may want somebody specifically, a subcommittee, working with you in your implementation. Now, we said you always think about diversity and inclusion and so forth. So next slide, Khush, there you are. How are you inviting your CBOs? Where do you have them sit? How are you engaging them? Do you have an advisory committee? I know everybody in the counties has to be extremely cautious about the firewall between the county contracting process and talking to providers. I know that can be a barrier, but just understand, how might you do this? How might you engage them where it's appropriate? How are they part of the governance and the conversation before you're into the RFP conversation? And then the last piece of this puzzle is, how are you engaging and involving the community and or people who have lived expertise? They may not even be the exact same people. You may want to think about the fact that your community, especially if you have a community pathway model, is also going to contain the people who are the providers, right? So community and providers may not be entirely exclusive. The intent here with this image on the right side of the screen is really just to be able to think about who you would want to have and where you want to have them. So for instance, you might have, if you were, say, working in a particular zip code with a particular demographic, you might have an advisory committee at that layer, at that level, and you might have different people at the multi-agency senior community level. Khush, anything to add on this slide?
I would just say that this is, while Kevin sort of started down at the bottom of the slide and we sort of worked our way up, where we ended, right, is likely the first thing you want to think about. So we didn't intend to communicate that, well, get all of this in place and then invite the community. Right? It's actually thinking through, okay, like, let me actually have this accounted for before I have my first meeting. Right? Or my first implementation focused meeting. These bodies may have been talking about the plan or planning, right? But when you start to shift to implementation, right, how you're going to have your community and lived experts support you, right, is likely going to tell you a whole lot about how and where you're going to have your meetings. So I'll the piece I'll add, Kevin.
Thanks. That's a great point. And should we go to the next slide, and you can talk about all the things that are affected by stakeholders and governance. So this is a good slide because it's our first one. You'll see that every time we have, usually, we start to talk about one of the domains, we go into detail. And this is the first slide like that you're seeing, but know that there'll be one for each of the domains.
Right, and so again, we're not going to go through all of these. This is your cheat sheet to go back and ask yourself these questions and see if they're applicable to you. But when you're thinking through stakeholders and governance, and let's keep our roadmap in mind. Okay, vision. Do I have a vision? If I have a vision, there might not be much for me to do except to make sure I keep bringing it to all my meetings and my documents. But if I don't have a vision yet, or a vision that we've agreed to yet, if one was beginning, we had a draft version of one when we submitted the CPP, but we really need to nail it down for implementation, then in your roadmap on that row, you'll have to say, okay, by when am I going to need to have this vision articulated, documented, and agreed to, if I want to make sure that I'm actually delivering services in September. You may here, you want to start to think through like, okay, am I going to have to modify the structure now that we're going from planning to implementation? Is it still the interagency leadership team 2083 or the prevention cabinet, or is there some other structure now that's needed for implementation? How is that structure going to provide oversight? How are we going to align all the strategies in that map all together and report on them? How are we going to have our community forums? By when do we need to have community forums and with whom? And then might there be any other population specific engagement that I need to do given my target population? Of course, I want my whole community to be brought along to wellness, to reorienting to wellness and thinking about supporting children and families. But if my target population is 13 to 17-year-old Latinx youth on probation in that zip code, for example, then there may be some, you may want to weight your invitations for engagement heavily in that community. So there might be population specific engagement that's in addition to engaging the community writ large. Again, more questions, and think about these in terms of deliverables and when do I need to be done? I'll just point out one. Budget. Well, by when do I need to have a budget? I had that spending plan I wrote. Now I have to turn that into a budget. By when do I need to do that? So my fiscal and contracts folks know what they're going to do. So then program design. Again, keep this in the context of the roadmap, but and keep the bigger it in mind. What is the program design supposed to get us to? Oh, here, this is the it. This is what we're building. And then given my local version of that in my county, right, here are some things you're going to have to think through as you think through program design. First and foremost, the people who will actually consume these strategies and services, how will I make sure that their specifications are in the forefront as we are designing? Do I need to create, I might need to create an asset map if I don't have, or I might finish the asset map that I started during my CPP, right? And have these dimensions looking at each strategy. Which level of prevention is it? How many services are under it? For each, are there EBP? Are some of those services EBPs? Are there not? Who's going to deliver those services? Under what kind of contracting or granting strategy? How do folks access those services? How do they get linked to them? What does the referral look like? Can I know what I want to support families with. Can I leverage this desire I have to support families this particular way? Can I leverage some other agency, system, or community strategy that's doing something similar? What might training requirements be, right? And by when on my roadmap might I have to figure out what the training requirements are? Right, Kevin? Turning it over to you.
to go back to the idea that you are bringing up about the program design and talking about program design and engaging the community, that there is you can't obviously design all of this as a one size fits all. There may be a particular service or a particular strategy where you're doing some very non-traditional kinds of things with the community, or where you would need a lot of design and co-design. There may be another strategy that you have that is a fairly straightforward situation where you're going to write an addendum to an existing provider in behavioral health and just be part of something, and you're going to use some of the money that way. And it's been designed, and it's a fairly standard approach. So that when you're doing your work, you may have to really think about doing this all the way at the service level, because every service is going to be different. And that's one of the things that's really essential. You want to make sure that you are engaging the community around something that you really want their input, and do some co-design. And those situations where, it's pretty much business as usual. It's part of a program that already exists and it's in place. Or you may want to rethink that, right? Like, how might we do this differently? So again, take it down as far, even though it says program design, that program design may be happening at a strategy or even a service level.
Yeah,
Thanks, Khush.
great. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, fiscal, and so this is the "you are here now" picture. All right, next slide, Khush. So right there, see, Khush pointed this out. There's 4 areas that are involved, and I'm going to take you through each of those 4 areas. Khush always makes me do this part because I'm kind of boring and businessy sometimes. All right, so funding, braiding, blending, figuring out funding and funding streams. That's why that budget is so important. The money that how much are you investing over what time, what's being funded by the block grant, what's partially funded by the block grant, how might you then look at other opportunities and other funding streams, which kinds of programs, and this is why what kinds of programs, knowing that service array across the county is critical. You don't want to recreate another program that Parks and Recreation is doing, or that juvenile probation is doing. You don't want to do that. So this communication is important, because you don't want to tap into additional funding for programming that is redundant. So the conversation around funding and braiding that funding and blending that funding is critical, but you have to have you have to have a pretty good strategy, and you have to know what services you want to offer before you can really start figuring out how this works. And by the way, those of you who may be attending who are providers, as Khush says, have been doing this really complicated stuff for a long time, and they can be a great benefit and a great resource to assist you in doing that. And then the strategy sustainability for any fiscal program that you come up with. All right, next slide. Again, not going to go through all of it, but selecting partners and being careful and bringing the inclusion conversation to this is really important. Khush and I worked with a county where the population that the county wanted to work with said, we don't like that provider, which of course was their go-to provider. Nope, we don't like them, bad experience, don't want to work with them. It's the community speaking. You need to know that. You also need to think about some of these provider conversations will be straightforward. There's this provider, they do this work, we like it, we're going to expand. Great. We might have to go create a selection process. We all know it takes a long time to get that all lined up. So you want to know that early in your planning process. Yep, takes us 6 to 9 months to get a contract signed for a new provider. You might have to do some work early on to be able to even get there. I want to just call your attention to non-traditional partners. So because we are having a heavy emphasis on working with the community, some of your service delivery might not be a standard kind of provider. And you might want to think about the kinds of things you are asking CBOs to do, right? If you are suddenly asking a small volunteer-run CBO that meets in a church basement to take on some significant new responsibilities, then you as a county and funding agency probably need to make sure you've got opportunities to increase the capacity of the people working there, and you've got the checks and balances in place to make sense for you. All right, next slide. So that's fiscal C. And then all about your contracts and setting up your contracts. Do you need to specify case management? Well, the answer is yes, you do. But what are the case management requirements for each contract that you're writing? They might not be the same for that small CBO as they might be for one of our larger providers that's used to very large funding from a county. You want to understand if there are expectations on the workforce training that you need to specify in your contract. Any particular kinds of things about linguistic communities, or what proportion of people might need to look like the community they're going to be serving. Do you want lived experience? Like, what are your workforce expectations? You want to think about that before you're putting together your RFPs, and certainly before you're signing contracts. How are you going to monitor the contract? So especially if it's a non-traditional partner, right? But in any case, if you are, say, an addendum to the behavioral health contract with a provider that already exists, how do you monitor that contract, right? What's the data? How do you want to extract data specifically around the dollars, say, child welfare is expending in that area? How would that work? How do you monitor it? How do you know that you're getting good value for the investment that you're making? And then what metrics might need to be tracked? What reporting do you require? So you want to think about these things before you're getting close to the contract. Next slide.
And again, in the context of the roadmap, by when will you figure out the reporting expectations that are going to go in the contract?
Yeah, see, now you see why that roadmap and that chronology can be so useful. Thank you, Khush. And then claiming and payment. And I know this seems like a nit, but believe me, this can get complicated quickly. So for instance, are there situations where if you're, say, funding like a direct services or direct financial aid, how are you asking the CBO or provider that is giving that money out? How are you accounting for that money? How is the payment going to work? Somebody just sends an invoice and says, oh yeah, we served 500 people for $400 each. Here's the bill for $20,000. Is that okay? What does your accounting department say? What are the things that they need? What are the requirements of the county? What are the requirements of fiscal? What are the requirements of the organization that you have? And then who's going to authorize those payments inside, especially if you have a program that's blended or services that are blended across multiple agencies. And then what invoicing standards are you going to ask providers or CBOs that are defined? What does that look like, and how are you going to do that? Because all of that is going to be part of you as a county then being able to claim for the state. Thanks, Khush.
All right, and then
there's the claiming conversation. Yep. That's okay.
Yeah. And we're going to speed up here.
All right.
So claiming is just another. It's another aspect of the funding conversation, and how claiming ultimately will happen. Either you're claiming to the block grant, or you're claiming to FFPSA down the road in a couple of years when we've got our EVPs up and our automation up. That might be a whole row in your roadmap, depending on how complex your system is. So service quality and outcomes, another domain in the checklist to be thought through in our 360-degree view. You want to look at your logic models again, and you want to look at them now as that they're not theory anymore. They're actually blueprints that you might hand to an evaluator or an implementer that says, here, that's the thing we're building. You may have a logic model for the whole family of strategies that goes into what you're calling your comprehensive prevention program. You may have logic models for each strategy or service. And then you might have logic models for the individual service provided by an individual provider, or something that's inside of a contract that a provider is doing.
On.
Right. Hold on, I'm gonna stick us on mute there. If you look across all your logic models in the outcome section, it'll tell you what all these services are trying to do, where the overlaps are, where the gaps are. How are you going to set benchmarks for those outcomes? And by when do you need to set those benchmarks so contracts can put them into contracts? Where are your data definition books for the things that you're going to put into dashboards, for example, to look at? Might you have additional needs over and above CQI for certain of your strategies? You might be doing something like guaranteed basic income, a pilot that might need to be evaluated on top of us just collecting information on contract utilization and efficiency. Okay. So those are all things to think through as you're asking yourself the questions you need in the service quality and outcomes row. And then in terms of reporting, for your overall program, you're going to have to think, okay, so what now are the reporting requirements for the money I've spent out of my state block grant allocation? Right, for now. How is my reporting going to be integrated with reporting I'm already doing, or do I have to have a completely new form to report prevention data? Who are these audiences I'm going to report to? And then what am I going to do, and who am I going to tell when my feedback loops tell me that I need to take corrective action? How's that all going to work? We heard a little bit, those of you that attended the CQI presentation by Chapin Hall, got a little deeper into sort of what some of these feedback loops are. There may be EBP specific requirements if your strategies are EBPs. What are those, and who's going to report those? And then Kevin, just 5 minutes perhaps on automation and,
and try and
reporting.
go really fast. So quickly, okay. So automation, and as we know, next slide, Khush. As we know, certainly the claiming for the evidence-based practices against FFPSA in California, we need to wait until CARES is ready in 2026. So there's that automation conversation. But in the meantime, when you're looking at setting up your prevention program and working on your prevention program, you do need to think about how you're going to store, manage, and control the information, right? You, especially, I know a number of counties are doing work with, they're taking EVOs or evaluated out referrals, and they're working with those. Well, certainly you don't want to keep a family on CMS, CWS and keep that referral open while you do all the work. Maybe you don't want them on CMS, CWS. Maybe you want to have a separate system. How are you going to handle personally identifiable information? How is that going to work? The whole point here is to keep people out of the system, but that means minimizing surveillance, or people having the experience of feeling surveilled, and yet being able to collect the information that you want to have. And then do you need to have particular kinds of data over time as part of your accounting systems? Do you need to have an interface into an accounting system? Again, this goes a little bit back to the fiscal, where we're talking about invoicing and claiming. So these are all automation points to think about in the organization. And next slide. Next is workforce. And really the big thing here is, yes, training, but workforce is a lot more, and this systems change than just training. Of course, there's training to the county, the people who will be doing the prevention work. There is training that will have to happen for people who at the provider level, coordinating all of that training, especially if you're going to be working with other agencies. But the big issue that is going to come up is the cultural change management as we move from an interventionist model to a prevention model. The organization is going to have to adopt and adapt to having almost a completely different business, I'll use that term, business model, a care and wellness model, as opposed to being purely intervention model. And the next slide is about policy, regulations, and rules. Why did you put this at the end, Kevin? And the policy people are going, oh, we're always at the end. Well, actually, it makes a lot of sense that you're going to want to start right up front with what are the policies that you think directly pertain to prevention today, what policies might be prevention, how do you say that in a sentence, might get in the way of your prevention program. You might really need to understand what policies are there that you might want to think about asking for change. Then those, as we know, there's a long lead time to get those put together. You're going to want to think about the processes that are changing and how they're changing. And you may really want to think seriously about how you document those and make sure everybody understands the training. You may have some implementation work here. And then finally, how do you make sure everybody knows the changes to new policies and new process guidelines? How are you making those available to staff? And Khush, I think that takes us, there it is.
Yeah, there they all are.
There it is, there they all are. It's a lot of information. There's a lot to think about. Next slide. And so where we started was, you don't have to see the whole step, just take the first step. I think the first step is to start to become aware that there is a staircase and you can get to the top. Many people have done that before you, and there will be a way to get this all handled. And Khush, I'll turn it back over to you.
And just again, back to let's bookending this very kind of technical implementation conversation, so to speak, with tools and templates and questions and methods. Bookending it with, these folks have been through enough, right? They deserve the best we have to bring. And that's not just the services, but the quality of the implementation of those strategies and services. Right? And we're hoping that perhaps you don't experience, this is our wish for you, is that you don't experience the implementation as a hike through an uneven canyon up to the top, but perhaps like an escalator, and we're giving you that takes a little less effort than we're used to as we prompt through implementation. And some of the tools and the questions that we're showing you can help grace those skids. And then I'll let you take, this is not, so folks, if you want to contact us, I failed to put it in the original deck. So if you want to, you can go ahead and take a screenshot of this. We can send you those tools and templates that we've been talking to you about, and happy to chat with you more about sort of things you're running into while you customize your CPP implementation locally and turn it from a plan or theory into actual tactics and practice. All right, well, we went a little over. So we didn't get, there's one question that I can see that came in that we can likely answer. That said, when will the state prevention CPP allocated funding be announced for counties? So the counties already know what their block grant allocation is, right? And there's a ACL, an all county letter, and a county fiscal letter that folks can email me, and we can get those to you. But so counties already know what their allocation is. FFPS, so that's for the block grant. For FFPSA down the road, what we're going to claim for those EBPs, it's not a capped allocation. It's a 4E cost reimbursement with a match situation. So there isn't a cap on that. So folks can go ahead and provide services for those that are candidates, and it is not a capped allocation. If they're a candidate and they need the service, you can claim for it. But that's, of course, a couple of years down the road when we get our automation and our sort of EBP structure all set up. All right, everybody, I am going to stop share and end it there. Thank you for being willing to go through this on behalf of children and families, right? We know it's not easy. And to the degree that we've worked with any of you, we're just so honored to be asked to implement something, help implement something so important. All right, everybody.
Thank you so much. And I just shared a couple of resources of some of the planning tools that we're developing for our counties through strategies. And so I know Kevin went through another example, and also I uploaded the PowerPoint so you have access to it. I know there were some questions about that. So just resources, feel free, whatever works for your county. I just want to say thank you, Dr. Khush. Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for today. This is a topic that everyone's really interested in to know, what do we do now? Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate all the information and going through that. And so any questions we have from the group that would like to ask? I know we had one question, but is there any other questions you may have? This is the golden opportunity.
We can stick around for a little bit.
Yeah.
But as a college professor, I know that people tend to not want to ask questions in the last 2 minutes of a session. Oh, we have a question. Yes.
Celestina.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for what you guys do. I'm on multiple coalitions trying to prevent abuses and support our communities. Specifically, I am the Youth Prevention Service Coordinator for Tulare County for substance use. So our strategies, it's underage drinking, marijuana, prescription pills, and I fought to get opioids added to our, and I'm successful. So in terms of what we're doing here today, because I'm newer in my position, I mean, do you have any direction as to how it relates to the things that are being covered in today and tomorrow?
Absolutely. So I don't know. I haven't read Tulare County CPP, right? Their comprehensive prevention plan, but that would be the first thing I would do, right? Is go read that CPP and say, okay, what strategies has the county, at least for now, said they're going to fund with this for now, the state block grant, and in the future, FFPSA. And how does that vision the county have? How is that related to the work I do? Right? Is substance abuse in that CPP? Is youth substance abuse in that CPP? And are they thinking about, and do we want more substance abuse strategy? Like, is it a more thing? Is it that we want to change the way we're doing it? Are we adding a population to it? I don't see youth, perhaps, right? So getting an idea of the map that's in that CPP, and then finding the team. There's got to be an oversight body, and we've told that everybody's been really clear to all the planning efforts that you need to find a way to listen to community, right? So when do they meet? Is there an opportunity for public comment, right? Can you ask questions about substance abuse writ large, about how they're going about it, and perhaps why, I'm just making this up, but why youth aren't present in that substance abuse strategy, right? And if youth are present, you can raise your hand and say, we're doing this for our behavioral health population. We'd love to do it for a child welfare population. Please, is there an RFP coming out? Right. So those are some of the things you might think about, Celestino, as somebody who's trying to locate themselves in that CPP.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. And they just notified me that they're going to go ahead and end the Zoom meetings.
All right.
So we are going to go back to the main lobby, but please contact our speakers for any questions. I know this is a very important topic. So thank you so much again to our speakers. Thank you to everyone for attending this session. And we will go back to our general session to end today's session. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Lucy.
you.
You're
Bye,
a great
everybody.
facilitator. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.